never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life.
Hey, Rob, I need you, investigator. I need you to join a secret society to confront occult horrors from beyond and keeping the true nature of magical incursions besetting our world hidden. Does this sound familiar?
It does sound familiar to me, Matt. I love Call of Cthulhu. I mean, I love Rippers, the Savage Worlds monster hunting game. I mean, I love. Sorry, what are we talking about?
What if I said it had steampunk elements and strange afflictions? Might you be guessing at a role playing game?
Oh, that's different. I mean, it's not different than Rippers, but it's different than what I was expecting. It's not Call of Cthulhu. I'm intrigued, Matt. Tell me more.
What if I said it uses a D6 based system and arc driven narrative play?
Well,
and it's a game of investigative horror.
Now that can only really be one thing. It's all clear to me now, Matt.
Yeah. Well, what are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about Vaesen. Vaesen. That's what we're talking about.
Obscure. No. Candelas are obscured here. A game that is very similar. Vaesen.
No blades in the dark.
Publishing.
No rippers. Just simple Vaesen. Some
Vaesen.
Vaesen, some folk creatures, some Scandinavian folk horror. Yeah, we're talking about the Free League Publishing game, recent-ish as far as role-playing games go, 2020, by a bunch of Swedes, not unlike the game that we reviewed a few weeks ago, Coriolis, same system, but yeah, entirely different feel, vibe, different mechanics, bunch of good stuff here.
It's completely different than Candela Obscura, but it's also very similar, but it's also really interesting, and I'm really excited to talk about it. The tagline's Nordic horror role-playing, and it takes kind of fae, folk tales, spirits, giants, trolls, and sets it in a not 19th century Scandinavia, where you play characters who can see said supernatural creatures with the mysterious sight, and you have to negotiate, battle, deal with them. It's another setting that uses the Year Zero engine, and let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, just talking about it does evoke other games, but there's some really interesting and unique stuff in this, and I think it's also just really well written and well done. It's very thoughtfully laid out. There's definitely enough to distinguish this from other similar games. It very much has its own thematic center, but yeah, on first blush, it does remind you a bit of perhaps Candela Obscura or even Blades in the Dark or Call of Cthulhu, any number of other horror investigative games. But that's because that's a cool genre. It's fun to play in, and there's lots of room for design within it.
In the design history, this might also remind people of another game we've reviewed, Tales from the Loop or Things from the Flood, because just like those games, Free League bought the rights to the art from Simon Stalenhag and made a game about it. The same thing happened with Vaesen, an artist by the name of Johan Erkegrans. Johan Erkegrans has done a bunch of book illustrations and made this great book of fae folklore illustrations, and Free League bought it and said, hey, you like RPGs? We're an RPG company. Can we use your concept to make an RPG game? Free League has done this before, right? They took Tales from the Loop, a book of cool Swedish art thing by a cool conceptual artist who has a unique style, and they made a role-playing game about it. And they did the exact same thing, except instead of 1980s kids with robots, now it's mustachioed steampunk investigators dealing with creepy folklore.
Much like Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood, the art direction really drives the vibe and the feel, and it's very easy to sort of get an idea for what type of game you're playing just by looking at the various illustrations, the creatures, the character art. It's extremely evocative.
And this game was kickstarted. It made around 250,000 American dollars, and then a sequel game, which is set in Great Britain and Ireland, raised around $600,000. And they've also released a ton of supplements. So this is a well supported game. But we're going to be talking about the core book today, Nordic horror role playing. So yeah, what else do we want to say about the general vibe of this book?
Before we go on, Matt, do you remember the television show Grimm? Does that ring any bells for you? So
yeah.
So I'm not suggesting that there's anything untoward happening here, but Grimm was this. Actually, it ran for like 5 or 6 seasons. A fantasy police procedural drama set and filmed in Portland, starring some guy as a Grimm. Who is a descendant of, I think, the brothers Grimm.
The brothers?
They fight monsters called, you guessed it, Vaesen.
Grimm.
It's like a monster of the week. He, fights werewolves and animal people. And honestly, it was pretty mediocre, though, again, 5 seasons somehow. Anyway, if you liked Grimm, you'll love Vaesen. If you don't know anything about Grimm, you'll probably still like Vaesen. I was just like, oh, this is kind of funny. What a quinkadink.
Yeah, this one, just like Tales from the Loop, is like, its inspiration of how it came to be is very clear. There's a really good artist who loved monster manuals and D&D like books, or the Swedish version of them, and one day made his own coffee table book full of cool monster designs, and they made a role-playing game about it. But it's like, what are the parallels? Well, just like Tales from the Loop has parallels, and like, hey, this is kind of like Stranger Things or certain episodes of The Outer Limits that are focused on children, or E.T. This is very much like the TV show Grimm, or something like BPRD, the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense. Hey, you've got to figure out what's up with these folklore things. Except you're not cops.
There's been a whole bunch of, how am I going to put this? I guess books and movies and TV shows sort of in this genre. In the last 10 to 20 years, there's, of course, like Grimm, like I mentioned, there was a Brothers Grimm movie starring Heath Ledger that was fine. There was Hansel and Gretel starring Jeremy Renner.
Witch Hunters.
Yeah. Witch Hunters. There was The Last Witch Hunter starring Vin Diesel. I have a real love of like low budget and failed fantasy movies, so I know all of these. Most people have never seen them, and not a single one of them is worth watching. But I like that sort of the Vaesen aesthetic is much more honed than any of these movies. But they all sort of like Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. Anyway, they all have, there's monsters, there's steampunk elements, there's varying degrees of supernatural ness. There's folk tales and folklore, except scary. This was a real thing in the early and mid aughts, or end teens even.
A couple things that distinguish this, and I think really make it unique, is in terms of vibes and setting, is that the Vaesen, translates as like spirit or creature, or maybe fae, monster even, aren't like good or evil. They just have to be dealt with. And the key part of the setting is like Scandinavia is undergoing rapid centralization and industrialization.
Yes. I love this part of it. And we'll talk about this in greater detail when we talk about the setting, but they've really cleverly and subtly done a few things with how they've set up the setting and the characters to distinguish this and make it very, very interesting, but still provide players and GMs like a lot of room to grow and explore. But it's much more precise than a lot of the just sort of like vague steampunky or vague fantastical woods settings of a lot of the other stuff that I mentioned. And they've done a really, really good job with it. And again, there's some precise decisions that they've made about what inspirations they've drawn from that I think are really smart and draw from their area of expertise to make a much, in my opinion, a much more interesting game and setting than if it was just a lot more generic.
setting it during the industrial or industrializing age, it's very vague, is great over, let's say, modern day or like actual medieval times, because you have this conflict. People are forgetting about the Vaesen. Things are changing socially, economically, politically. And then the other thing that's like really interesting about this to me is that your team, your player characters, they're not cops, they're not enforcers. They're more like researchers, right? They're like an academic society, which we'll get into.
Yes.
And I love that. So it's like knowledge and cunning are your best weapons.
Obviously, this is one of my favorite time periods, and I think obviously there's a lot of just like truly tremendously interesting stuff that happens at the intersection of industrialization and modernization and centralization and imperialism. And so just sort of like a vaguely alternate 19th century Sweden is just like such a cool place for this type of game. I think it like works so tremendously well for telling the types of mystery, fantasy, horror story that you would want to tell in this with this game.
Yeah, and those are the three key words, right? Mystery, fantasy, horror, right? The Vaesen and the people that might be ensnared or trying to dominate them can be very, very scary, and bad things can happen to your characters. It's also incredibly like fantastical, right? The mundane, like dairy farms and steel mills of Scandinavia are contrasted with like trolls and dark magic and mystical portals to the fairyland. And then, yeah, it's also mystery, right? Every time you show up in a place, you've got to figure out what's going on. And that's the core of the like play loop. Figure out what's going on and maybe find some way to deal with it.
Like Matt mentioned, it's important that the Vaesen are not good or bad. They are just different. They're other, and they need to be dealt with. And this, I think, another like clear inspiration for this is The Witcher, which is similar, right? Geralt is always dealing with monsters of some sort, and like
monsters that are perhaps more human than the humans who are the monsters. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
The Witcher. I love The Witcher, and
Yeah,
it's about as subtle as a
concept.
sledgehammer. But I like that. Like every story is like, actually, the vampire isn't really the monster. It's this other guy who created the vampire by doing something so fucked up that Geralt has to like kill him too. Vaesen isn't quite like that.
The one vampire character in The Witcher is perhaps the like most lawful good character in the entire series.
Yes, I mean,
he's so nice.
He's so nice. Anyway, the point is that Vaesen isn't quite like that. It's not like turns out the real monster is man.
Right.
But sometimes it can be. But they are they're different. They're scary. They're uncertain. You don't have to. You're not. It's not intended that you are monster slaying necessarily, though that may be part of it. You aren't, charging into a dragon's lair and killing it. You are trying to figure out what's going on, why it's there, and if necessary, performing a ritual or doing some research or coming up with a solution to your demon water horse problem or your, fairies in the town well problem, right? It's not, I mean, there are great games that are just Monster of the Week where you are fighting a different Monster of the Week, but Vaesen is much more investigative. What's going on in this town? Why is this ghost or werewolf or whatever causing problems? And how do we deal with it? Which may or may not involve violence.
And if that was all there was to Vaesen, I would say it's a pretty good game. But what is linking this all together in the concept of linking the monster of the week and you're researching or finding ways to deal with these different monsters is that you are now the like refounding members of a secret society that is researching the Vaesen and finding some compromise. There are factions. We can get into it in a little while. But like the game gives you like, hey, when you make characters, you're basically all that's functionally left of a society that researches Vaesen and finds ways to deal with them, maybe. And you decide as a party what direction the new reforged society will take. And you have a cool base. And so this is a way to take your serialized monster of the week and turn it into something bigger.
Well, and we discussed this last week, I think, when we were talking about types of players and things that certain players want to do that are not always supported by other games. And I think I said that I love Blades in the Dark for this because it's built into it that you have a crew and a hideout, and then actual game mechanics for improving your crew and your hideout and getting more stuff and affecting the growth and development of Duskwall. And Vaesen is the same way. You are this society has been devastated, and you are new recruits, and you, like Matt said, you are deciding and guiding it through the process of rebuilding, which to me, I love this shit. I think that's just one of my favorite things to do in an RPG. And without a little bit of like mechanical guidance, it feels just kind of falls flat to me. But having sort of specific goals and specific paths of growth and development in the book, you don't have to have much, but I love what Vaesen has done. I think it's so cool. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to that section, but I love that this is built into the game, the same that is built into Blades in the Dark. I think this is an awesome thing to have for any sort of serialized, like long-term campaign.
Yeah. Before we get into the actual sections, I think the only thing that like we haven't covered is that as player characters, you are Thursday's child, right? You know, we all learned the rhyme if you watch Netflix Wednesday or if you just know your nursery rhymes, but it's Thursday's child has far to go. And your journey is that you are, you know, blessed or cursed through some traumatic event with a sight that allows you to see Vaesen at all times, right? And there are other people like you throughout the world, and the game structure encourages you to meet those people. But it's like, yeah, this is why you are the supernatural investigator, not because you trained or any way, you just kind of had this thrust upon you, and so you can come from a variety of backgrounds. And then when you deal with the Vaesen, one of the key parts that I don't think we can save for later is you can't kill a Vaesen through force of arms or might. Each Vaesen has suggested rituals that your characters will have to uncover to either deal with them or drive them away. And of course, the game is set up so that like you don't always have to like bury the revenant in a consecrated church coffin and then nail 7 iron nails into the lid in the shape of a cross. Maybe you can just figure out a way to ask it to go away and it will agree to that. So
I like the site a lot. I've increasingly come to enjoy systems or settings that have just like a little bit of guidance, a little reason why your players have something in common or have or would come together. Something like the site, something like in Vampire the Masquerade, you're a vampire. But, just it still gives you plenty of freedom to create the character that you want, but like just as a baseline understood thing, you all have the site. You're all Thursday's children, and so you can all see Vaesen, and that gives you something in common, and sort of like guides your direction when creating characters.
well, now that we've introduced it, I think let's get into the system. Let's head into the chapters. Let's start with chapter 2, character creation. So as Rob said, you have the site. That's what binds you together. You're all what's left of the society, except you're all kind of new recruits. It's a year 0 league system. And this one uses the D6 pool, which means that you have 4 attributes, 12 skills. You have a sort of a special skill called resources. And whenever you make a check in the system, you're rolling D6s trying to get 6s. 6s count as successes. More than 1 6 could be a critical success or a success on an extremely difficult task. And like all year 0 systems, this one has a unique mechanic that lets you re-roll dice. We talked about in Coriolis, you could pray to the icons, and that would let you re-roll, but it also gave the GM dark points. In this one, you can re-roll, but you have to take on a condition, which is like damage. And you can hold up to 6 conditions, 3 physical, 3 mental or spiritual, before your character kind of gets knocked out of action.
In addition to sort of the standard character creation elements, all characters in Vaesen also have a trauma and a dark secret. again, to sort of play into our horror and dark fantasy tropes. These are all varyingly interesting, and they're dependent on your, or partially dependent on your archetype, which we'll talk about each of the choices for that in a minute. But this all these packages come together: attributes, skills, talents, motivations, traumas. Like we said in Coriolis, I compared to some of the other systems we talked about, I think this does a really good job. I think Year Zero does a really good job of, I don't think it like holds your hand. I don't think it provides too much structure, but like it really like it moves quickly. Like it's very easy to go from like one bit to the next and know how to create a character. It all sort of like flows naturally, and by the end you have a very like clear idea of who your character is and what they can do. In my opinion,
Right.
I think it does a really good job of this.
As a game master, you basically show the players the archetypes and you say, pick one of these 10. And there's great examples, just like with Tales from the Loop and Coriolis, where players can just be like, all right, for my motivation, it's becoming famous. My dark secret is that I falsified documents to get my research results. But they're evocative enough, you could easily make one of your own after you've looked at a couple of these. And archetypes, like Rob said, they give examples for a dark secret, motivation, trauma, which is how you got your sight, and your relationships. Archetypes also pair with one of the 4 attributes as one of your like favorite attribute, the one that you can have up to 5 points in. You also pick whether you're old or young, whether you get more attribute points or skill points. Each archetype also has 3 unique talents that only that archetype can have, and a minimum and maximum resource rating. We should also mention that there is a fun alternate life path system for creating your character where you can roll or pick on some tables that's included at the end of the book. But we've got these 10 archetypes.
Yeah, and the archetypes, they tell you, much in the same way that D&D's archetypes tell you what type of game you're playing, these tell you what type of game you're playing. They are things like the academic, the doctor, the hunter, the occultist, the officer, the priest, a private detective, a servant, a vagabond, and a writer.
Finally, a class where I can be a novelist.
That's right. Finally, I could be a useless journalist in my game. Yeah, and yeah, some of these are clearly designed for one thing and some are designed for others. Again, it reminds me a lot of certain settings for Call of Cthulhu, where you might have a lot of people who are playing explicitly non-combat related people. And those are just as useful in a game of Vaesen as an officer or a hunter. You know, you probably do not want to have a lot of actual fights with either people or Vaesen. So a lot of what you're going to be doing is investigating, talking, sneaking around, all sorts of things. And all of these archetypes are useful at one or more of those things in a specific way.
If you want to fight an ash tree wife, you might get real fucked up really quickly, because this system plays into that theme, Rob, really well, in that you don't have like hit points and resolve points like in Coriolis. You just have conditions, right? 3 physical conditions: exhausted, battered, and wounded, and 3 mental conditions: angry, frightened, and hopeless. And these are mostly flavor descriptors. They give you a penalty to the rolls of the appropriate type when you take them. But it's just sort of like, if you push a roll and the game master asks you to describe how you push a roll, you say, I'm becoming desperate. I take the hopeless condition, I re-roll my dice, right? And you can act out how your character is hopeless. But because you only have 3 of each condition, and every time you take damage in this, whether from pushing or from failure of a roll or from being attacked, you're quickly very close to being broken. So your characters are not action heroes. They're nerds.
They're nerds.
Vaesen nerds.
And
Vaesen
nerds are big, powerful, magical creatures. Not big. They're powerful magical creatures, even the little ones. And you may fight them, but you really don't want to, because they're tougher than you. They can't be killed by normal means. They can only be banished. And so, yeah, and you don't have hit points, right? You can't like soak damage. Everything that happens to you, every like negative effect will compound to make it harder for you to do anything. And yeah, it all sort of like works together to evoke the type of game that you're playing, which is a scary one where you are outmatched and you have to use your wits and planning and lean on your team to try to stay alive.
Yeah. And like most year zero systems, to really have a very solid chance of succeeding, not only do you want to have lots of points in your attribute and your skill, and maybe get assistance from another player, maybe have a equipment bonus to give you some extra dice. You also have a unique ability built into the cycle of the adventure loop, is that whenever you go out on research trip to do your monster of the weeking, you get an advantage. You get to describe what happened to your character on the journey there. They read a cool book, they had a dream, and when that, you get to once per adventure, throw that in there to get some extra dice. But to really succeed, you're probably gonna have to push yourself pretty frequently, which is gonna really ratchet up the tension because yeah, this game really leans into the horror setting through the fragility of your characters.
I don't want to go into this too deeply because it's much the same as Coriolis, but I do want to mention how good of a book this is for game masters, that they've done a really good job of giving you the tools that you need to run the game. They include a lot of examples of play, and at precise moments where you would need to have an example of play to understand what's going on. There's lots of sidebars that address specific instances and things that you need to do. There's a really good one at the beginning of the skills section on the story must go on, about how suggestions for how to make sure that even when players fail a roll, how to make sure that they are failing forward, right? This is something we talk about all the time. It's a key part of playing the game. But
right, they just kind of straight up say, often when players fail the roll, have them accomplish what they want, but they take some penalty. Yep. Things get more complicated. Just say yes, but when they
exactly
fail.
And none of this is groundbreaking stuff. It's just if this was the only book you were working with, it gives you a lot of the tools that you need to run a good game. It's written with running Vaesen in mind, which is nice.
One other great point of game master advice that applies to everything, and I think this is even in the year zero engine document, but it's also repeated here on page 39 of the Vaesen book, is an advice box that says a single roll. And this is a great reminder to all of the games. Yeah. It basically says when your player character tries to do something, you make one roll for the entire situation. And it goes on to say, if they're trying to sneak through something, don't keep making them roll stealth skill checks because eventually they're going to fail. And This is a problem I see all the time with new game masters. They push and they make they keep making players make rolls, and eventually you're going to fail, and then the story does not move forward. So define the situation, one roll.
Move the game forward. Yeah, whatever they want to do, one roll for it. Just keep things moving at a brisk pace. This is great advice. Yeah.
Now you know what's out there in the world. No one can prepare you for the world. Even I, how could I, who loved you as you were, how could I have shielded you from her or them?
Before we get to the design of the adventure and stuff, I have two critiques of the system, and they're pretty minor, which is one, I think what doesn't shine, at least in this version of the year zero engine, are the talents.
Yeah.
I think when you design such an elegant system, there's not a lot of room to make talents that are really interesting. Like I always like my favorite, my favorite feat in like D&D 5e is like magic initiative or ritualist, something that lets you do something you can't do.
Something that lets you totally add a dimension of play to your character. And the talents in Coriolis weren't mind-blowing or anything, but I think they were a little bit better. And maybe that was because there was also a more developed like not magic, but
mystical power.
mystical. So
Psychic
there was
power.
always something kind of like interesting to take that would do exactly that. That would add a dimension of play to your character. Most of the talents in Vaesen, I noticed the same thing, are just like a flat like plus this, or lets you do something a little faster or a little bit safer. None of this is bad. You're never going to be like, oh, this sucks, but it just isn't very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many plus X to Y skill when Z
Yeah.
happens, ignore conditions when X. There's a couple like really good ones like automatic writing, which is a new way you can get clues as a writer. You can like let a spirit take over you. But for the most part, they kind of fall flat for me, which is disappointing because everything else is great. On the like combat side, fear is an important part of encountering Vaesen. You almost always have to make some kind of fear check when you first encounter them.
Mhm.
And I just thought the fear system was like a little basic, and I would have
Yeah.
liked it to be a little more interesting and not take players out of the action for so many rounds. It tends to, if you fail it, be, on average, you're out for 3 to 4 rounds. It does give you the option of always attacking, but considering like how important it is, a more robust system I think is needed here.
This is kind of a problem with a lot of like fear or sanity or whatever, is there's just like not a, I don't know that I've ever encountered like a really good way this has been depicted or implemented, because I suppose to play it out, it always ends up that your player character loses control in one way or another of their character, which is, there's no way to make that fun. And I don't have like a good solution here, but I found the same thing with fear. It was kind of basic, and it was just kind of too easy to end up not being able to do anything, which is just not a great mechanic in my opinion.
Right. I would have liked something where you lose some control, but like, oh, when you pick fear, you get to either pick, are you cornered, in which case you can only take aggressive actions? Are you afraid or cowering, which means you can only take supportive actions? Like some way to limit but not take you out of the fight, and defining those in like an easy, like have a little bunch of tick boxes on your character sheet to tick which one you are. Okay, then we're on to the setting information about the history of the society and kind of building your base. So you're in the mystical city of Uppsala.
Uppsala, yes, this is so cool. Sorry, Uppsala,
which
is a real
I just
city.
found is a real place.
Sorry,
I was like, oh, when I read this, I was like, what a cool made up place they made. Oh no, it's real. There's a 50,000 person university there.
I mean, Uppsala is it's a great setting because it's like the fourth biggest city in Sweden. It's not very big, but there's a huge university there. One of the best, one of the oldest in Sweden. Gustav Vasa, one of a king, I think, of Sweden, was from there. He built a big dumb castle there. There's a cathedral. Again, it's not as big as like Stockholm. Like it's not even like a particularly big city in the grand scheme of things. But that makes
was
it sort of
Gustav Vasa the king that built that really big ship that just sank immediately?
Yes,
yeah,
the one that sank, that got sank in the, and it's like well preserved. The Vasa, yeah. Anyway, I think this is one of the like small decisions that they made that like just really like delight me as a person interested in history and sort of like this time period, because it gives you enough to work with, right? The cathedral, the university, the castle, like a little bit of a lot of history and culture, but like it's not a huge city, so your players can still, they can't, necessarily count on having everything that they need, and they're not so like overwhelmed they're going to get lost. Like they have a chance to sort of like have an impact on their surroundings. I think Uppsala, alt history, Uppsala is like a perfect, just a great place for the society to be based.
And speaking of the society, we're given a history of the society going way back. Carl Linnaeus is in this version of Sweden, not just creating taxonomies of fish and plants, but also of Vaesen. And we're introduced to some factions within the society, people who want all Vaesen destroyed, or another way of approaching them. And then we find out that most of the society was killed by a bunch of giants not too long in the past. And the rest of the people have either fallen on hard times or wandered off to other parts of the world. And so the player characters have essentially inherited not just a base, but an organization that as they play, they will reshape, and they get a character sheet for their base, Castle or Gildenkrantz, Rosenstern.
Gillenkreutz? Yeah.
Gillenkreutz, Castle Gillenkreutz. And they can add all sorts of cool things. They can take on special roles within the society.
Yeah, I love this. Again, 19th century, this is peak secret society in Europe. This is when we get the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and the Order of the Hermetic Dawn, and also like the rise of, secret, Republican societies and democratic, student initiatives. Like this is just like tons of really cool groups of people with funny names doing interesting things, and the society being one of them that your players get to build. It fits so perfectly in the setting. I love it. It immediately gave me a ton of ideas. I think this is great. And yeah, and you have, like Matt said, there are some society members who are like, all Vaesen must be destroyed, and some wanted to understand it. And so your players can go in with an idea of like what type of society they want to build. Do we want to be a ruthless, crusading, inquisitorial society, or do we want to be more academic, or do we want to be religious, right? Do we want to like spread the light of, Christ's church to the corners of Stockholm and drive away the folklore? That would be kind of a fun one. Be real like asshole, religious types.
Or have characters who support different factions, right? And get a little bit of conflict fun inter-party drama. And we're also not just given the society, a history of it, and how the characters fit into this history. There's a brief gazetteer of Uppsala, and it's a great gazetteer. There are tons of named people in it. Organizations like the newspaper, the police, radical student groups fill in the blanks with what they want. Yeah, it's a great like home base for both adventures and for downtime.
Yeah, like Matt mentioned, there's details on how to build your headquarters and drive the society. Like Blades in the Dark, you have specific facilities or upgrades that you can get. Things like a pigeon loft or a library, a temple. You could buy contacts, right, or acquire contacts like bankers and fixers and a patron, personnel, right, like a gamekeeper. I mean, I just love this stuff. You could spend years just doing society stuff, investigating Vaesen. Like, you could run this campaign, as far as I'm concerned, indefinitely, right? There's just always going to be something for your players to do, and something that the society needs to get done.
And if you finish with this one, there's always the British Society, which I'm sure sucks way more than the Swedish.
Yeah, sure. It's grim and awful. I haven't read it either.
So the society is great, but Rob, it's all about the cones. It's all about the Vaesen,
that's right,
which is the next chapter. And we got a little over between a dozen and 20 Vaesen, and they all have huge write-ups. They all have big art, and for each Vaesen, we're given their basic stats and what they can do in combat and what conditions the players can inflict on them. We also have what magical powers they have. We have a write-up of what they want, what might upset them, and a suggested ritual and secret that can be used to deal with them, banish them, or take care of them. And for each one, I think we're given at least 3 examples of how to put them into a monster of the week scenario.
This is just, it makes me wish that other monster manuals were as good as this. If these are
peak bestiary writing right here.
This is peak bestiary, and these are obviously cultivated and aimed towards a specific setting and a specific time. So you couldn't necessarily borrow these for any setting, but you could probably borrow them for a lot. And if you were at all interested in running this, or just curious, it is worth getting this book for the Vaesen alone, because it is, like Matt said, it's peak bestiary. It's perfect, right? A little bit about them, 3 examples of conflicts, some magical powers, characteristics, a secret, the traditional sort of like ritual way of dealing with them, a little bit of flavor. So good. It's just like there's just so much to work with, and it's still all sort of like contained in basically 2 pages for each Vaesen. It's like this is just masterfully done. Do you have a favorite Vaesen, Matt?
I like the ash tree wife. I like the way the werewolf is handled. If you want to fight
the
a
werewolf.
good old,
One of my favorite depictions of a werewolf. Like it's really cool. Yeah.
I like the way giant, like I really enjoyed reading a more folklore take on monsters we've been fighting at my table forever, like trolls and giants, right? You know, like to deal with a giant, the ritual is they flee at the sound of church bells, and you must either sprinkle holy water or raise a cross in front of its dwelling. Or you could maybe turn them to stone if you can learn their true name.
Yeah, it's terrific. These are also like richly rooted in folklore. Like they're not. There is a troll, there is a giant, there's a werewolf, but while these are combat challenges, they're so much more nuanced and interesting than a standard, D20 system troll or giant or whatever.
And their stats are, sometimes like there are Vaesen here that like if your party was equipped with revolvers and sabers, they could absolutely dust in a couple of rounds with some good rolling. But of course, they will flee or return or turn to water and reform somewhere else. So yeah, I just love the idea of like, yeah, in a pinch, you can fight these things. However, you're going to have to figure out a more permanent solution if you want to deal with it. It feels like peak Hellboy.
Yes. Yeah.
I really like how these fights are setting up. The stat blocks are simple. It also lists the thing that can get a little complicated is that each Vaesen can select from 0 to 3 magic sets of powers, and then you'll need to go look up what those magic powers can do and how you can use them on a village or on players. But that's kind of maybe more in the background, but you do have to do a little prep of the monster before you
run. And the magic system, it's not, players could do magic as well, we should mention, potentially, and it's not complicated, I guess, but it wasn't to me entirely intuitive, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's sort of like its own addendum system, which you don't have to engage with a ton, but it doesn't seamlessly integrate a way a lot of the other things do. And yeah, you'll have to do a little bit of prep. It's not complicated. It's just a little bit to the side, I guess.
Right. If you're not sure what to do, the creature makes a magic roll, the players oppose it with 1 of 3 skills, and then you say something cool like you're now mute, or your blood feels like ice water running through your veins. You take this penalty.
Leaves grow out of your hair, and your fingernails turn to bark.
We've got these cool Vaesen, right? The neck, mylings, mermaids, mares, lindworms, night ravens, and your classic trolls and werewolves and woodwives. How do we put them together in a package that is fun to play? Let's talk about the mystery.
The mystery, yes. And I love this. This is a whole chapter on how to create the core, both like driving force and conflict of the game, and that's the mystery. This is, again, I use the phrase monster of the week all the time, but like this is the perfect monster of the week setup, because it's like every session there is a Vaesen at the center of it. This is one of the great things about The Witcher, right? Is like every time you open up a new Witcher story or watch a new Witcher episode, there's a monster at the center of it. What is the monster? How do you deal with the monster? And this is just like, this is why Buffy was popular. This is why Supernatural is popular. It's a fun, simple, like bite-sized adventure. And you're like, there's a bad thing or a scary thing. How do you deal with it? And so, you start with a Vaesen, and then it gives you all of these ways to approach putting that Vaesen into conflict with human beings.
And the advice to game masters is to start with one Vaesen, and then to form a primary and a secondary conflict around them. And I find this works well for like a single or 2-session game in which the players arrive somewhere, deal with a problem and investigate it, and hopefully reach some sort of conclusion or confrontation. It encourages you, and I think this works pretty well, to make the primary conflict involve the supernatural. The secondary conflict is maybe more intrapersonal among the people dealing with either the supernatural or the consequences of industrialization and inequality and new social movements in a village or in a city. One can float logically from the other. There could be a misdeed that someone has done that has caused this problem to happen or not. And then it tells you, okay, now you need to start thinking about what the atmosphere of this encounter is going to be, and what are the clues that I can throw around for players to bump into.
And I really like how that this is structured in this section. Like we mentioned, it's critical that humans are a part of this, right? Like the Vaesen are obviously dangerous on their own, but like what makes it something that your team needs to deal with is the intersection between Vaesen and humans or human civilization, right? So it's often that a human is trying to either use a Vaesen or take advantage of a Vaesen to do something, summon will-o'-the-wisps or get rid of a rival with a brook horse, or a Vaesen has bewitched or otherwise caused problems for a human. And then there are knock-on secondary effects in the village or in the community and all this has to be dealt with. The center of the conflict is the Vaesen, but the sort of like spider web of effects makes this both interesting in terms of like problem solving and investigation, right? You have to sort of like get to the bottom of all of it and potentially deal with a bunch of, nonsense.
My favorite piece of advice here, especially because it's advice you and I have given on this podcast before, is to include a countdown and a catastrophe, which is basically a set of events that should logically take place unless someone intervenes. And then the really bad thing that will happen at the end. It's asking yourself, what would happen if the players did nothing? And that not only gives you a logic to tell you how the Vaesen or the people in the village or the town will interact with the players, what their motivations are, but it will also like give you some events to shake things up as players are poking around the inn and looking for clues or going to the library or talking to some, railroad worker about what's been going on. Boom, a thing happens. So you make yourself a little countdown. Perfect. Great piece of advice.
They also have an 8-step program.
It's too many steps
for the mystery. I agree that it's too many steps, but listen to the steps. I think they're good. You could do much worse than to follow this just broadly, but it's, prologue, player characters get a scene for their daily life if needed. Invitation, the mystery is introduced, giving those characters a reason to visit the location. Preparation, the characters prepare at their headquarters. Journey, the game master describes the journey to the location. This is where Matt mentioned you can get advantage, right? That they take time to study or talk to each other or prepare or train or whatever. I love this. Arrival, you arrive at the location. Places, you investigate a number of places, often 3. I like this. 3 is a great number. 3 is a great number for clues, places, scenes, etc.
And for the
choices. Confrontation, players confront the creature or whatever behind the conflict, and then aftermath, you go home, denouement, whatever. So some of these can be cut.
Right. You can start at step 4 or 5 easy.
Yes. But when structuring your adventure, you could do a lot worse. And not just for Vaesen, just for any sort of adventure plot, using this as a structure. I really like it just for thinking about, putting your adventure flowchart together.
The one spot where I think this game master advice falls just a little bit short, in my opinion, is on discussing the structure of the mystery. It gives you some examples of like some nodes and, it could be linear. It could be, you can go to any of these. And once you have this information, you can go to the confrontation. It is a little bare bones. I was just reading So You Want to Be a Game Master chapter on mysteries, and while it might be impractical to include 40 pages on designing mysteries here,
right.
The advice on mysteries is, it's not bad. It's just, I would say if you've never run a mystery before, you might seek out other advice on constructing.
This is one of the maybe the only place, but one of the places where it gives you lots to work with, but doesn't really help you bring it together. You are given all of the tools that you need and tons of examples, but you will have to make the final step when it comes to designing the mystery. And to be fair, they do include an example adventure, so maybe that's a way of thinking about, bringing it all together. But the mystery section does sort of just leave you with a bunch of charts and examples and ideas and trusts you to put it all together.
Right. It trusts that you know how to run a role-playing game and particularly run a mystery. Again, I've read worse starting advice for mysteries. Speaking of the starting adventure, Rob, this is past our tests of, yes, there's a starting adventure in the book. It is The Dance of Dreams. And Rob, I have to say, I have some critiques, which we'll get to, but I think this one's a pretty good one. It's not the most brilliant adventure I've ever read, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, and we mentioned that, Coriolis had not one but two, which I thought were okay, but really didn't do very much for me. This one is much better. And it's not mind-blowing, but I think that I think it's a much stronger starting adventure. I generally like it. I would run it. I think it's neat. And I think it's interesting. And it's got just like it's a good introduction to the setting, I think.
I think we should, if we want to talk about it in vague enough terms that no one has to turn off their podcast in case someone's running this for them, I think what it does really, really well is it's actually a pretty good mystery. There's a ton of characters and they all have clues, and all the clues lead you where you need to go. I think it would be very hard not to figure out what's going on. The downside of that is there's a fair number of NPCs to juggle at the beginning. The way they've compensated for that is it's mostly kind of a bottle episode. Most of the action takes place in one very evocative location with tons of cool things to explore. I think in terms of the setting, it does one thing really well and one thing not really well. I think it does a really great job of giving you a ton of leads and background for introducing the society and making a larger campaign about the intrigues of the society. And there's some fun blanks you can fill in as the GM that you actually really have to fill in. You have to answer the question what the villains kind of wanted in more detail to make this work. What it doesn't do well is have a really cool Vaesen.
Yeah. I before we get to that point, and this was my primary objection with the adventure as well. And we could tell you this without it being a spoiler, but there is a really cool, like Matt said, setting with a map, a lot of neat stuff. It's the Witch's Cat Inn. Even if you don't run the adventure as written, this is such a neat location. You could take it and adjust it. It's awesome. It's just like it's a bunch of NPCs, a good map, lots of clues and hints and hooks for potential adventures. But yes, the sort of the payoff for the starting adventure is it's so-so, right? You would want it to be a little bit more of an exciting Vaesen or an introduction, and you could change that. That would be relatively easy to change as a GM. But generally, again, especially compared to the Coriolis ones, this is a pretty good starting adventure, I think.
I would absolutely run this as my first adventure. It might be a little long. I could see this taking more than one session, but even so, yeah, it's just such a great introduction to the setting and how to investigate and spooky supernatural things happening. I would say, like, my critique of it is that and this is true for most adventures, so it's not a serious critique, is you need to make yourself like a one-page, like, NPC relationship map, because the way the what is really going on is presented can be a little confusing because there's multiple generations involved and there are some NPCs that are kind of there as maybe false leads or people the players can, if they missed a crucial skill, can go to that you might consider cutting. Looking at you, fancy private investigator guy. But
yeah.
it's got great maps, it's got great handouts, it's got a couple great events, it's got a cool catastrophe if the PCs do nothing. Yeah, I love it. Your players will have lots of feels for the kind of main NPC who needs their help, who's still alive. They'll also have some feels for maybe one that's not alive. But I will say, if you don't like A Dance with Dreams, I read a couple of, and there are lots of third-party modules, including a ton on Drive-Thru RPG. There's Free League has published a whole campaign, is in hardcover or in PDF. But I looked through a couple of them to try and find one that was like the perfect one-shot. And the one I like the best is Summer in December by Matthew Tyler Jones. And it's available for a couple bucks on Drive-Thru RPG. I'm sure we'll put a link in the show notes. And unlike A Dance of Dreams, this one has a great Fae, has a great Vaesen that the players can interact with and deal with. I like this one a lot, and I think it's maybe a little simpler to run and more guaranteed to complete in a single play session.
Okay, so that's Vaesen, and I think it's clear to say that we both liked this a lot. Again, it's hard to the core conceit of taking a cool art book and building an RPG around it is brilliant. There's nothing not to like about it. And they could do it as many times as they wanted. And I would never be mad. I guess it's probably because they actually make good RPGs to go with them. So I might be mad if they didn't make a good RPG, but sure. This is great in the same way that Tales from the Loop was great and Things from the Flood. And if you're not obviously interested in a dark fantasy horror RPG, it may not have much to offer you. But I think even if you aren't, the bestiary, the Vaesen, is so good and so cool and something that you could borrow for any type of game. And it's also just
any fantasy game.
Any fantasy game. And it could be easily modified for all kinds of things. I think this is a great RPG with a lot to offer. And I would love to run this or play in this at some point. I think it's one of my favorite, maybe my favorite Free League setting. I haven't actually I think I've actually spent more than a handful of hours playing any of them, so I don't have any hands-on experience to draw from. But I really like this. I could think of a lot of things to do that would be fun with this setting.
Didn't like Mutant Year Zero. Didn't really like Forbidden Lands, which is their fantasy one. Liked Coriolis a lot, and this one is by far my favorite. I think the system works great for the setting and the feel and the vibes. I think the GM advice on using a supernatural creature to create conflicts, it's perfect. And
yes.
I think we joked about it being steampunk, and there's a lot of steampunky things, and I will defend it and say it could be steampunk if you want to. It's just 19th century.
It's not very steampunk. You can ignore anything that smacks of steampunk to you if you want to, but if you want to have trains,
you could put them in a Zeppelin. Well, there's trains no matter what.
Sorry,
trains are real, Rob. Zeppelins never existed.
Okay, Matt. Trains, a magical mechanical vehicle that runs on steam power in the 1850s. Okay, sure.
It's so efficient, we haven't topped it even today. We could invent something that cool back then. You could and you could make this game about a lot of things. You could make it about nationalism. You could make it about industrialization. You could just make it about the Vaesen. You could even set it. Well, they've already made a setting book for the British Isles, but there's even a little bit of advice for being how to reskin monsters or come up with cool rituals of your own for your own region's folklore. So, if you would rather run it in the Philippine Islands or North America or something, I think if you want to put the work into it, the rules are bare bones enough. You can change the other things and insert your own favorite or personal mythology into this game.
Yeah, I think it's very variable, and while I would love to play in Uppsala in the setting provided, it would be super easy, like Matt said, to without doing any like legwork, just a little bit of reskinning, a little bit of adjustment, put it just about anywhere and run the same type of game.
Well, I'm excited to see how our other mini dark fantasy horror investigation RPGs that are coming out stack up against this, because it's set a pretty high bar. So we'll see
this
what
just happened.
Candela Obscura
Yeah.
is like. My book has not arrived yet, so.
Yeah, we joked about this at the beginning, but Candela Obscura just came out, and I am looking forward to reading and reviewing it. And I'll be honest, I'm a sucker for this stuff. I love reading about it. I think it's super, one of my favorite types of games to play. So as long as they keep putting out horror investigation role playing games, I will review them. And then probably never run them, but I'll think about it.
We will think about them. And if you have thoughts that you are thinking about this game or others, drop us a line, dmofnone@gmail.com or at dmofnone on Twitter.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/dungeonmasterofnone or join our Discord. Links to all of this in the show notes. Thanks for listening, everybody, and keep rolling them dice.